I'd always heard stories about people going missing in Alaska. Out there, it wasn't much of a mystery. The wilderness was unforgiving. Between the bears, moose, and the sheer size of the backcountry, it made sense how someone could vanish and never be found. I thought I understood that. I thought I respected it. But what I experienced made me realize most people, including me, have no real idea how bad it can get. It started when I took a job helping an outfitter up near Anchorage. Mostly it was guiding hunters, hauling gear, making sure city folks didn't do anything stupid in bear country. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and I liked the quiet. After a rough few years, I just wanted to be away from people. One morning, my boss asked if I'd help a friend of a friend get some supplies flown out to a cabin he kept out in the middle of nowhere. Said the guy was a bit of a loner, but harmless. I didn't ask questions. The money was good, and I didn't have anything better to do. We loaded up the bush plane, and I met the guy briefly before we took off. His name was Robert. He was quiet, polite. He didn't say much. We flew for about an hour. The pilot dropped us on a gravel bar next to a river, and we hiked another mile to this cabin. Calling it a cabin was generous. It was rough, hand-built, probably without permits, but sturdy enough. It was the only man-made thing I could see in any direction. Just trees, brush, river, and snow-capped mountains far off. Total isolation. Robert was setting up for a long stay, stocking up food, fuel, ammo. I figured he was just another guy getting away from it all. But there was something about the way he moved. Calm, slow, like he was always thinking 10 steps ahead. He wasn't chatty, which was fine. We worked in silence most of the day. Late in the afternoon, I noticed a steel drum out back. The lid wasn't fully on, and when I passed by, I caught a whiff of something sour. Rotting meat. I figured maybe he'd been trapping, though trapping season wasn't in full swing yet. I didn't ask. You don't poke your nose into other people's business out here. Still, it stuck with me. Before I left, Robert handed me $100 in cash. I told him the outfitter had already paid me, but he insisted, said it was for my trouble. I took it. He thanked me in that same quiet way, not unfriendly but distant. I hiked back to the gravel bar and waited for the plane. Over the next few weeks, something kept nagging at me. That smell, the way Robert moved, just small things that added up wrong. Then the news broke. A woman had escaped from a man's cabin. She flagged down a trucker near Anchorage, half-dressed, shackled, bruised. The story was horrifying. She said the man had flown her out to the middle of nowhere, chained her up, assaulted her, and when he got bored, he let her run. Not to set her free, but to hunt her, like an animal. When they released his name, Robert Hansen, my stomach dropped. It was him, the same man I'd helped haul supplies into the woods. The same man who'd smiled and thanked me with soft words and cold eyes. The police raided his home. They found maps, dozens of them, tiny X marks scattered across the Alaskan wilderness. Graves. Some were bodies. Some would never be found. Couldn't sleep for days. I kept thinking about how close I'd been. If I'd stayed longer. If I'd stumbled on something I wasn't supposed to see. Out there, no one would have heard a thing. No one would have found me. In the following months, the details came out in pieces. Hansen had been doing this for years, taking women, flying them into remote spots, giving them a head start, and then hunting them down with a rifle. He'd killed at least 17, probably more. I don't think we'll ever know the true number. What hit me hardest was how normal he seemed. He wasn't a monster in the fairy tale sense. He was just a man, a quiet, polite man who liked to bake, go hunting, and murder women in the woods. I think about that trip often, about the way he stood out there next to the cabin, hands in his pockets, watching me with that dead-eyed stare. I think about how easy it would have been for him to make me disappear. He had the plane. He knew the land. He didn't need a reason. Wrong place, wrong time, that's all it takes. I've guided plenty of people since then. Rich hunters, college kids on their first backpacking trip, photographers chasing that perfect shot of a grizzly. I keep my eyes open now. I watch people closer. You never really know who you're standing next to out there. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, I hear things. A branch snapping in the distance. A shape moving between the trees. It's probably a moose, maybe a bear, but I always remember that smell by the cabin. And I remember Robert Hansen. And I think the wilderness isn't what makes it dangerous. It's the people who know how to use it. I had always liked the quiet of the mountains. Back then, in the summer of 1989, I thought a trip to a remote cabin in Stamford, New York, would be a peaceful break from the noise of the city. I had no idea what was coming. The cabin belonged to a family named McDowell. It wasn't a rental. It was their family place, tucked far from the main road, with no close neighbors, no cell phones, and no easy way out. You couldn't even see it from the gravel road unless you knew where to look. Tall pines surrounded it like walls. I wasn't staying with the McDowells, but I knew them. My friend Jerry grew up with Eben McDowell. Jerry had been worried about Eben for a while. Eben was only 23, but he'd been struggling. People said he wasn't right in the head. Schizophrenia, they whispered. He'd been quiet, strange, but never violent. At least not until that week. Jerry wanted to check in on Eben, so I offered to drive up with him. Just for a night, maybe two. I didn't think much of it. You always hear about people going through rough patches. You don't think you're walking into something worse. We arrived in the afternoon. The dirt road was rough, and the trees pressed in so tight it felt like we were driving into a tunnel. The McDowell cabin was old, with a slanted roof and a porch that sagged in the middle. There was a woodshed out back and a tiny outhouse farther into the trees. A thin trail led into the forest. I remember that part clearly because it felt like it went on forever. When we got there, Eben's truck was parked outside. No other cars. The place seemed quiet. Too quiet. The air was still, not even the usual chirp of birds. Just the crunch of gravel under our feet. Jerry called out for Eben. No answer. He knocked on the door. Still nothing. I felt uneasy, but we'd come this far. Jerry opened the door. I followed. Inside, it smelled wrong. Not the dusty, wooden smell you expect from an old cabin. More like copper, like rust. The kitchen light was on, but barely. A low, buzzing glow. And then we saw it. Eben's parents, his brother, his grandfather, all of them dead. The scene was worse than any horror movie. I won't describe every detail, but it was clear they had been shot. No struggle, just execution. On the table was a note, written by Eben but trying to frame his father. Something about debts, family shame. It was clumsy. It didn't make sense. Jerry was shaking. I felt frozen. Every sound felt louder. The buzzing light, the clock ticking, even my own breath. We should have left. We should have gone straight to the police. But Jerry was desperate to find Eben. He couldn't believe his friend had done this. So, against every instinct, we searched the cabin. We found nothing but silence. The trail behind the cabin was the last place to check. I remember how narrow it was, swallowed by trees. We started down it, each step heavier than the last. About 50 yards in, Jerry found a spent rifle casing. It was still warm. That's when I knew Eben wasn't far. The woods felt alive, watching. Every branch snap made my heart jump. The trail kept twisting, leading deeper into the forest. No sign of Eben, but we kept going. It wasn't long before we spotted him. Or rather, he spotted us. I noticed movement to my left, a shadow shifting between trees. Eben stepped out, rifle in hand, aiming right at us. He didn't say a word. His face was blank, empty. Not angry, not sad, just gone. Jerry raised his hands, but I knew words wouldn't fix this. Eben was too far gone. In that moment, time slowed. I could see Eben's finger tighten on the trigger. I grabbed Jerry and pulled him down just as a shot rang out. The bullet hit a tree behind us. Splinters flew. My ears rang. We ran. Pure instinct. No plan, no direction, just away. The forest was a maze. Every tree looked the same. The trail was gone. Eben fired again. The shot cracked through the woods. So close I felt the air shift. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. After what felt like an hour but was probably minutes, we stumbled upon a rocky outcrop. We ducked behind it, gasping. I could hear Eben moving through the trees. Slow, methodical. He was hunting us. Jerry was panicking, trying to figure out a way to get back to the truck. But I knew we couldn't outrun bullets in open ground. We needed cover. So we waited, still as stone, listening. The woods were deathly quiet, except for Eben's slow steps. He was enjoying this. This was his game. But then we heard another sound. Distant at first, then louder. Sirens. Someone must have called it in. Maybe a hiker heard the gunshots. Maybe a neighbor farther down the mountain. I don't know. But those sirens were getting closer. Eben heard them too. His pace changed. No more slow stalking. Now he was moving fast, crashing through the underbrush, away from the cabin, away from us. We stayed put until the sounds of his movement faded. When we finally dared to stand, we saw the flashing lights through the trees. The police arrived in force, guns drawn, dogs barking. Jerry and I stumbled out of the woods, waving our hands. They got us to safety, but Eben was still out there. The standoff lasted hours. Eben had holed up deeper in the woods, maybe in a hunting blind or another cabin farther out. They tried to talk him down. He wouldn't listen. In the end, they had no choice. Eben raised his rifle on the officers. They shot him before he could fire. It was over. The aftermath was a blur. Statements, news cameras, reporters digging into Eben's history. The story was everywhere. People talked about mental illness, about isolation, about how no one had seen the signs soon enough. But I had seen his eyes. In those woods, through the trees, I saw a man who had been lost long before that day. I never went back to Stamford after that. The cabin was torn down. The land sold off. But every time I see woods that thick, that quiet, I remember. Sometimes monsters aren't born in stories. Sometimes they grow slowly in silence until it's too late. That day, I learned what real fear feels like. Not ghosts, not legends, just a man with a rifle and no one left to stop him. I remember the trip up to Stamford, New York, like it was yesterday. It was early June, the kind of summer where the air was thick with the smell of pine and wet earth. The roads twisted up through the Catskills, narrowing the farther we got from town. I'd been looking forward to that weekend at the cabin. No cell service, no noise, just the woods and quiet. Exactly what I needed. The McDowell cabin wasn't anything fancy. One of those old family places that had been patched together over the years. Weathered wood, a rusted tin roof, small windows that barely let in the light. The kind of place where the silence gets so deep you can hear your own breath. I didn't know much about the McDowells then, just that they were a local family, longtime residents, kept to themselves. People said they were good folks, hardworking, private. I arrived late Friday afternoon. The dirt driveway crunched under my tires as I pulled in. The trees stood tall and close, casting long shadows even in daylight. The cabin sat back from the clearing, half hidden by brush. It had that settled look, like it had grown out of the ground itself. I unpacked, set my gear inside, and took a walk down to the small creek that ran behind the property. The water was cold, snowmelt still feeding it from the higher elevations. Birds called back and forth in the treetops. The wind moved through the leaves, whispering in a way that made you feel like the forest was talking about you. Night came fast out there. 1 minute it was dim, the next it was black. I had a fire going in the old stone fireplace and sat reading by lantern light. Every once in a while, I'd hear a crack outside, a twig snapping, a branch shifting, normal sounds, but in that deep quiet, each one felt close. Too close. I tried not to let my mind wander. Tried not to think about what could be out there in the dark. Bears, coyotes, maybe a cougar. That's what you tell yourself. But the mind's a tricky thing. It doesn't always listen to reason. The next morning was gray and damp. Fog hung low between the trees, curling around the trunks like smoke. I brewed coffee on the wood stove and sat out on the porch, watching the mist drift. It was peaceful in a way, but heavy too, like the air was pressing down on you. Around mid-morning, I took a walk along the old logging road that cut through the woods. The ground was soft, my boots sinking in with each step. A few times, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. Not echoes, these were distinct. Crunch, pause. Crunch, pause. I'd stop, listen. Nothing. Just my own heartbeat, loud in my ears. I told myself it was an animal. Deer are curious. Bears too. Still, I picked up a sturdy branch just in case. I made it back to the cabin without incident. The fog had lifted, but the sky stayed overcast. I spent the afternoon splitting wood, clearing brush, kept busy, kept my mind from wandering. That evening, as the light faded, I noticed something off. The woods had gone quiet. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just stillness. I stood on the porch, that branch still leaning by the door, and listened. That's when I heard it. Faint crack, then another, steady, moving closer. I'm not a stranger to the woods. I know the sounds of animals, the rhythm of their steps. This wasn't that. This was deliberate. 2 legs, human pace. I felt my gut tighten, cold knot twisting inside. I backed into the cabin, shutting the door softly behind me, locked it, secured the windows. The firelight flickered against the walls, throwing shadows that made the small room feel even smaller. The steps stopped just beyond the porch. Silence again, a silence that pressed against the cabin walls, heavy and suffocating. I stayed still, barely breathing. Then another sound, not a knock, more like the brush of fingers against wood. A slow scrape along the siding. Goosebumps raised on my arms. My mind tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a branch, maybe the wind, but there was no wind. It went on for what felt like hours. That soft, deliberate scrape. Then, without warning, it stopped. The forest seemed to exhale, sounds slowly returning. The chirp of a cricket, the rustle of leaves, like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. Sat by the fire, that branch across my lap, ears straining for every noise. The next morning was clear. Sunlight filtered through the trees, warming the damp ground. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. I found tracks in the dirt by the porch. Not boot prints, bare feet. The toes splayed wide, deep impressions where the ball of the foot had pressed down. That knot in my gut twisted tighter. I packed up, cut the trip short. As I loaded the truck, I caught movement in the treeline. Just a flicker, something slipping between the trees. Watching, I left, tires spitting gravel as I tore down the driveway. I didn't look back. Later, in town, I heard the story about Eben McDowell, about what he'd done to his family in that very cabin, how he'd snapped, paranoia, voices in his head. They said he'd left a note trying to blame his father, but it didn't hold up. He was found not far from where I'd been staying. The standoff ended with gunfire. The cabin had been empty since. No one wanted it. I hadn't known the history when I went up there. Would I have stayed if I had? Maybe not. But it wasn't ghosts or spirits that scared me out of those woods. It was the simple, terrifying truth of what people can do. The mind, when left alone too long, can twist in on itself. And out there, isolated, with nothing but the trees and silence, those thoughts echo back louder. It was real as the cold ground and the bare footprints outside my door. I haven't been back since, and I don't plan to. I've always enjoyed the peace of the woods. I grew up around trees, learned to hike before I could even drive, and never really felt comfortable in busy cities. That's why, when the chance came up to rent a small cabin near North Pond in Maine for a few months, I didn't think twice. It was supposed to be a quiet break from work, a time to clear my head, to be away from the noise of the world. The cabin was small, 1 room, plus a bathroom tacked onto the back like an afterthought. There was no internet, no TV, barely a radio signal. Perfect, I thought. Just me, the woods, and maybe a couple of good books. The first week was uneventful. I went on long walks during the day, cooked simple meals at night, and sat by the small fireplace with a cup of coffee. It was spring, but cold still clung to the evenings. The nights were so quiet I could hear the trees settling. The wind made them groan, as if they had their own language. The locals had warned me in their casual way to keep things locked up. People get careless with cabins out here. Lock your doors. Bears, raccoons, you never know. I took their advice. Every night before bed, I'd double-check the locks. Not that I thought much of it. I was more worried about curious animals than anything else. But about 10 days in, I noticed something strange. Little things. A box of matches that wasn't where I left it. A spoon that had clearly been used, though I was certain I hadn't touched it. At first, I thought maybe I was just forgetful. Maybe I had used that spoon and didn't remember. Maybe I knocked the matches aside by accident. But then it kept happening. I'd wake up and find my pack of granola bars a little lighter. A few slices of bread missing. My cheap, old flashlight wasn't where I left it one night. I told myself it was nothing. I was alone, tired, and maybe just being careless. Still, the feeling that someone had been inside the cabin started to grow. You know that gut feeling, the one that keeps you up at night? That's what it was. One morning, I went out to the small shed next to the cabin. That's when I noticed boot prints. They were faint but clear enough. Not mine. The tread was different, and they looked older, like they'd been used for years. The shed was locked, but something told me that didn't matter much. Whoever it was, they knew their way around. It wasn't just the food. Things would be out of place. A chair slightly turned. A cabinet not shut properly. It was like someone was creeping in while I slept, taking just enough to avoid notice, but not enough to stay completely hidden. That night, I didn't sleep well. Every creak of the wood, every rustle outside, felt like footsteps. I stopped leaving food out. I started sleeping with a hunting knife within arm's reach. I'm not the paranoid type, but the feeling of being watched, of being visited, gnawed at me. About 2 weeks into my stay, I woke up to find the front door unlocked. I was certain I had locked it. It wasn't wide open or anything, just unlocked, as if someone had come in and left quietly. That was the moment it got real. My skin went cold. The thought that someone had been inside while I was sleeping, that they had stood there, maybe just a few feet from my bed, was terrifying. I started walking the perimeter of the cabin each morning, looking for signs. I found them. More boot prints, disturbed patches of earth. Once, I found an old candy wrapper, half buried near the shed. It was a brand I hadn't seen in stores in years. Something about that made my stomach twist. Whoever was sneaking around wasn't just passing through. They'd been out here a long time. The strangest part was how quiet it all was. No vandalism, no mess, no threats, just quiet visits. Silent thefts of small things. It was like someone was trying to survive without being noticed. One afternoon, I hiked a few miles out, thinking maybe I'd find some answers. That's when I found what I can only call a camp, though it was more like a nest. Tucked behind a dense patch of fir trees, there was a small clearing with signs of human living. Old tarps rigged into makeshift shelters, rusty pots, a heap of scavenged supplies, some clearly stolen, canned food, batteries, flashlights. It was like a graveyard of things taken from cabins like mine. There were no personal items, no sleeping bag, no clothes. It was eerie how impersonal it was, like someone had stripped away everything that made them human. A life boiled down to pure survival. That hit me harder than I expected. I didn't linger. My gut told me not to. I hiked back fast, every snapping twig making me spin around. The woods, which had felt peaceful days before, now felt alive in the wrong way, like they were hiding someone. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept the lights off, sat by the window with my knife, watching the tree line. Hours passed. Midnight, then 2. Around 3 in the morning, I heard it, a soft scuff against the porch. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. Then, very slowly, the door handle turned. It didn't open. It just turned, then stopped. For a moment, nothing. Then soft footsteps receding into the woods. I didn't dare move until dawn. The next morning, I found new boot prints on the porch. Closer this time, bolder. Whoever it was, they didn't care that I knew anymore. That was worse than the sneaking. It meant they felt confident, that they could walk right up to my door. I called the local sheriff that day. There's no shame in saying I was scared. When they arrived, I showed them the prints, the shed, told them about the missing food. They listened carefully, but I could tell they'd heard it before. Could be him, one of them said. We've had reports of a man living out here for years. Breaks into cabins, takes what he needs. Never violent, but slippery as hell. That didn't make me feel better. The idea of someone out there, surviving in the woods for decades, stealing, watching, living just out of sight. It was worse than any ghost story. I decided not to stay the full few months. I packed up that evening. By the next morning, I was driving back toward town. As I left, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Not from the side of the road, from deeper in, from the woods. Months later, I read about his arrest. Christopher Knight, the North Pond hermit, lived out there for 27 years. Over 1,000 burglaries. Never spoke to a soul in all that time. Just slipped in and out of cabins, stealing food, batteries, propane tanks. Keeping himself alive, invisible. It was surreal seeing his face in the news. The man who had stood on my porch in the dark, who had quietly unlocked my door, taken my bread, my batteries. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who had stepped out of the world and chosen never to come back. Looking back, I realized how lucky I was. He could have done worse. He never did. But the fear, the vulnerability of being watched, of being invaded without violence, that stays with you. The woods haven't felt the same since. Even now, when I go hiking, when the trees close in and the path disappears behind me, I can't help but think of him, of the quiet footsteps, the soft turn of a door handle in the dead of night. The woods can keep secrets for a long time, and sometimes those secrets are standing right outside your door. I wasn't really one for ghost stories, but the locals like to talk about the Bennington Triangle like it was cursed. Growing up in Vermont, you hear about those disappearances more than once. Mid-Dye Rivers, Paula Weldon, others whose names faded with time. The woods have a way of swallowing people, they'd say. I always figured people just got lost. The mountains don't care if you're old or young, careful or cocky. One wrong turn, bad weather, and you're done. Simple as that. Still, when I got the offer to house-sit a hunting cabin near Glastonbury Mountain, part of me paused. The cabin belonged to a friend of a friend. Quiet place, no neighbors for miles. I get paid to stay there for a few weeks, keep an eye on the place, do some maintenance. In my mind, it sounded like a peaceful break from the noise of town. Solitude was something I didn't mind. It was early October when I drove up there. The trees were on fire with color, leaves carpeting the old dirt road leading to the cabin. The air was sharp, clean, smelled like pine and wet earth. The cabin itself was simple, with siding darkened with age, green tin roof, one chimney puffing lazy smoke. It sat in a small clearing, with the treeline creeping close on all sides. Cozy, isolated. I settled in easily. Days were filled with small chores, splitting firewood, clearing brush, fixing a loose shutter. Nights were quiet, sometimes eerily so. No hum of cars, no voices, just the creak of old wood and the constant whisper of wind in the trees. The darkness here was different. It was full, heavy, pressing against the windows like a living thing. But I never felt afraid. Not yet. The first few nights passed without anything strange. Then came the noises. Started subtle. A light knock, like branches tapping against the cabin walls. I figured it was wind, maybe a squirrel or raccoon, but the sounds grew louder, heavier, not the quick scamper of paws, but slow, deliberate thuds, like footsteps, not on the porch, but around the sides of the cabin. Circling, I'd grab the flashlight, sweep the beam out into the woods. Nothing, just the trees swaying, their shadows shifting like tall, dark figures. It happened again the next night, and the next, always after midnight, always that slow, steady walk around the cabin. Never running, never breaking into a rush, just that calm, measured pace like someone walking a perimeter. I'd remind myself of bears, of deer, but bears don't walk in circles. Deer don't linger. One night, I stepped out onto the porch with the rifle the owner left for bear protection. The air was colder than usual. My breath came out in thick clouds. The sounds had stopped when I opened the door. Silence poured in, heavy and waiting. I scanned the treeline, heart thumping in my ears. Still nothing, but the feeling of being watched was sharp enough to cut. I stood there for what felt like hours, then went back inside, bolting the door. Mornings always seemed to erase the fear. Sunlight made it feel like I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I had. Isolation does things to your mind. The next day, I forced myself to take a long walk into the woods, following an old game trail leading deeper toward Glastonbury Mountain. The trees grew denser, their branches twisting overhead, choking out the light. I paid attention to my path, marking fallen logs and odd-shaped rocks. Getting lost out here wasn't on my to-do list. About 2 miles in, I found something strange. A small clearing, too neat like it had been cleared by hand. In the middle sat an old fire ring, long cold. Around it were makeshift seats, logs arranged in a circle. It wasn't recent, but it wasn't ancient either. Someone had been here. I couldn't shake the thought of that someone being nearby, watching. I turned back, my pace quicker, every snap of a twig making my heart jump. That night, the noises came again. Louder, closer. The steps weren't just outside the cabin now, they were on the porch. The boards creaked under the weight. Slow, deliberate. Then a soft rattle of the door handle. Once, twice, like a hand testing the knob. My pulse hammered. Rifle in hand, I stayed perfectly still. The rattle stopped. Silence returned. Minutes dragged by. Then came a new sound, the soft crunch of footsteps moving away, back into the woods. Not running, walking, calm as ever. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat by the window until dawn, eyes fixed on the trees, rifle across my lap. The next morning, I found prints. Not clear ones, the ground was too covered in leaves. But there were definite depressions. Boots, human, leading from the treeline to the porch, circling the cabin, then back into the woods. The hair on my arms stood up. I called into town, got the local sheriff's office. They said they'd send a patrol up, but warned me it'd take hours. This place wasn't a high priority. I understood. Vermont's rural like that. While I waited, I decided to check the perimeter again. About 50 yards from the cabin, I found another trail I hadn't noticed before. Narrow, overgrown, but definitely a path. Curiosity pulled me down it. About a quarter mile in, I found an old hunting blind. It was crude, just a platform wedged into the trees. But what caught my eye was the pile of wrappers, old cans, and a small camp stove. Fresh enough that it hadn't rusted out. Someone had been living here, that someone had been watching the cabin. The patrol showed up later, 2 deputies who looked unimpressed. They checked out the blind, nodded, said it was probably some squatter or drifter, told me to keep the rifle handy and call if anything else happened. Typical advice out here, but the nights kept getting worse. The pacing returned, now accompanied by faint scraping on the walls, like a knife or maybe a stick being dragged along the wood. Sometimes it would stop beneath a window, pausing there for minutes before moving on. I never caught a glimpse of the person. The darkness swallowed everything beyond a few feet. But they were there. I knew it. One night, the sounds changed. More than one set of steps. 2 people, maybe 3, circling, scraping. That night, I truly felt fear. Real fear. The kind that sits cold in your stomach. I stayed locked in, every light on, rifle aimed at the door. They didn't try to get in. They just made sure I knew they were out there. Morning came like a gift, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not alone. I packed up quickly. The idea of spending another night out here wasn't an option. I loaded the truck, but when I got in and turned the key, the engine gave me nothing. Dead. Not even a click. I checked the battery cables, fine. I looked under the hood, nothing obvious. But deep down, I knew. Someone had done this. Sabotage. I wasn't going to wait for them to show up again. I grabbed my pack, slung the rifle over my shoulder, and started walking down the dirt road. It was 10 miles to the nearest house, maybe more to town. The sun was dipping low. I kept moving, ears tuned to every sound. After a while, I heard them. Footsteps. not trying to be quiet, just following, keeping pace. I never saw them. The trees were too thick, the shadows too deep, but they were there. I kept my rifle ready, never raising it unless I had a clear reason. You don't shoot at noises, but you stay alert. Hours passed. The woods felt endless. My legs ached. My throat was dry, but I didn't stop. Stopping meant giving them time. Eventually, I reached the paved road. Civilization was still a few miles off, but it felt like safety. The footsteps had stopped somewhere back in the woods. They never crossed that line. When I finally got into town, I reported everything. The sheriff sent a few men back up. They found the sabotage truck, the makeshift camp near the blind, even more signs of someone living rough out there. But no people, no arrests, just more questions. I never went back to that cabin. Never wanted to. I still don't believe in curses, but I believe in people, in what they're capable of when no one's watching. The woods around Glastonbury have a reputation for making people disappear. I think the truth is simpler. Sometimes it's not the woods that swallow people. Sometimes it's other people. That's the part folks don't like to talk about.